A young billionaire ignores a child shivering in the cold at a traffic light, but when he reads the card she hands him, he breaks down in tears. Ethan Carter straightened his silk tie as he looked out the window of his penthouse apartment. The view of New York City at night was a dazzling display of lights worth millions, but it no longer stirred anything in him. His eyes swept over the illuminated skyscrapers as if he were looking at a run-of-the-mill wallpaper. "Sir, the car is ready," announced Marcus, his driver, over the intercom. "I'm on my way down," he replied without enthusiasm. Another evening, another event. Ethan checked his watch, a Swiss piece that cost more than many of his employees earned in a year. He had exactly 20 minutes to make it to the launch of a startup his company had just acquired. He wasn't running late. He never was. Punctuality was one of the many rules he imposed on himself. In the mirrored elevator, he studied his reflection, an impeccable suit, perfectly styled hair, erect posture. At 34, Ethan was the embodiment of success. His tech company had grown exponentially over the past 5 years, earning him a spot on the list of the nation's most influential young billionaires. Business magazines featured his face, calling him a genius, a visionary, an innovator, words that rang more hollow each day. The building's lobby was a parade of marble and glass. The doorman greeted him with respect, almost reverence. Ethan returned the greeting with a brief nod, without really seeing the man standing before him. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," said Marcus, opening the door to the imported car. Ethan slid into the back seat, immediately picking up his phone. Dozens of unread emails, multiple messages from executives and business partners. His life summarized in notifications. "To Park Avenue," he instructed, though Marcus already knew the destination. While the car wove through the city, Ethan automatically responded to messages. He was efficient, precise, like a perfectly programmed machine. Occasionally, he looked out the window, watching the city go by without truly seeing it. They stopped at a traffic light. There was heavy traffic, even at that hour. Luxury cars next to worn-out vehicles. New York did not discriminate in its traffic jams. A movement at the window caught his attention, a gentle tapping on the glass. Ethan frowned, irritated by the interruption. With a sigh, he lowered the window slightly. "Sorry, kid, I don't have any cash," he said automatically, eyes still on his phone. "I don't want money," came a child's voice. Ethan lifted his gaze to find the face of a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 9. Dark, messy hair, worn-out clothes, but her eyes were intensely alive. In her small, grimy hands, she held out a homemade card. "Please," she said, extending the card, "just read it." There was something in that request, a simplicity, a contained urgency that made Ethan accept the card without thinking. He took it mechanically, like someone receiving a random flyer on the street. "Lights green, sir," Marcus notified him. Ethan slipped the card into his jacket pocket without looking at it and gestured for the driver to move on. In the rear-view mirror, for just a fraction of a second, he saw the girl standing in the same spot, watching the car drive away. Something about that image bothered him, but he pushed the feeling aside. He had an event to attend, people to impress, deals to close. The launch went as they always did. Elaborate speeches, rehearsed applause, expensive champagne in crystal flutes. Ethan circulated the venue, shaking hands, smiling when required, signing preliminary contracts. His name was mentioned with admiration, his presence treated as an honor. "Ethan Carter in person," said an investor, as if encountering a celebrity. "Your latest app is revolutionary. How do you always stay ahead?" Ethan gave the answer everyone expected. It's all about never being satisfied with the present and constantly envisioning the future. Sound bites. His life was full of them. Polished lines rehearsed in front of a mirror until they sounded natural. The investor smiled, impressed, not perceiving the emptiness behind the words. After 2 hours of forced networking, Ethan felt his energy drain away. He had fulfilled his role. No one would notice if he left now. "Marcus, I'm heading out. Meet me at the entrance." The cold night air was a momentary relief. While waiting for the car, Ethan adjusted his coat and felt something in his pocket. The card. He had completely forgotten about it. For a moment, he considered throwing it away without reading. It was probably just another plea for help, something his charitable assistants could handle. But something, maybe boredom, maybe a rare spark of curiosity, prompted him to pull out the small card. It was simple, handmade on a piece of repurposed cardboard. In shaky, childlike handwriting, it contained only one sentence. "Please help me. I have nowhere else to go and all I want is a chance to start over." A sudden tightness gripped Ethan's chest. The simplicity of the message struck him like a punch. There was no embellishment, no fabricated story for pity, no emotional manipulation, just a direct plea, raw in its honesty. The car arrived, and Ethan climbed in, still holding the card. "Home," he said distractedly. During the ride, he couldn't put the card down. He reread the message, recalling the girl's eyes. There had been something in them, a determination, a dignity that clashed with her ragged clothes. "Marcus, did you see that girl at the traffic light? The one who gave me this?" The driver adjusted the rearview mirror to look at Ethan. "Yes, sir. She's often at that intersection. I've seen her before." Do you know who she is? Where she comes from?" Marcus hesitated. "I don't know the details, sir. But from what other drivers say, she lost her mother recently. Seems she has no other relatives." Ethan fell silent, processing the information. A child alone on the streets of New York. It wasn't uncommon. He knew that. The city had thousands of homeless children, statistics he'd encountered in his company's social responsibility meetings. But now it wasn't just a statistic. It was a specific girl with bright eyes and a handmade card. The car pulled up in front of his building. Ethan got out absent-mindedly, still clutching the card. "Have a good night, sir," Marcus said in farewell. "Good night," Ethan replied, without truly registering it. In his silent, perfectly organized apartment, Ethan removed his jacket and loosened his tie. He poured himself an expensive whiskey and walked to the window, gazing out at the city sprawled beneath him. Somewhere down there, he thought, that girl was probably trying to find a place to sleep. "She's not your responsibility," he said aloud to the empty apartment. He tried to distract himself. He opened his laptop, checked his company's stock prices, reviewed reports. But the image of the girl at the traffic light persisted, along with the words on the card. "Please help me. I have nowhere else to go, and all I want is a chance to start over." Start over. The word echoed in his mind. How many times had Ethan spoken about fresh starts in his motivational talks? "Innovation is the art of starting over," he used to say. Empty words from someone who had never really needed to start from nothing. He left his whiskey untouched and headed to the closet. In one corner, neatly arranged in boxes, were items he periodically donated to charitable organizations, lightly worn clothes, electronic devices replaced by newer versions, objects he'd bought on impulse but never really used. Charity at a distance. Comfortable. No real involvement. He went to bed and tried to sleep, but the card's words haunted him. He tossed and turned, more restless than he had felt in years. His mind, usually occupied with market strategies and tech innovations, was now fixated on the image of a little girl at a traffic light. At 3 a.m, he gave up on sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, rubbing his tired face. He picked up his phone and opened a news app, looking for distractions. Headlines about the economy, politics, technology, his usual world. And then, as if fate was taunting him, a small headline. Number of homeless children rises 30% in the city. He tossed his phone aside. He walked around the silent apartment, feeling strangely out of place in his own home. The white walls, designer furniture, carefully selected artwork, it all felt like it belonged to someone else. He returned to the window. The city was starting to wake with the first hints of dawn. Early morning drivers, night shift workers heading home, homeless people waking in their makeshift shelters. "She's not my responsibility," he repeated, weaker this time. But something had changed. The words on the card had found a crack in the armor he had so carefully built around himself. Beneath all the layers of success, ambition, and self-control, there was a persistent emptiness, a feeling that despite everything he'd achieved, something essential was missing. He went back to his bedside table and picked up the card. He looked at the childlike handwriting, tracing the outlines of the letters with his finger. "A chance to start over," he whispered. In that moment, something broke inside Ethan Carter. It wasn't a grand revelation or a dramatic epiphany, just the slow, painful admission that, despite all his wealth and power, he couldn't remember the last time he'd genuinely helped someone without calculating the benefits to himself. He sat in the armchair by his bedroom window, watching the sun rise with the card in his hand. By the time the sun finally rose over the horizon, Ethan already knew what he had to do. Not out of social obligation or for PR image. For the first time in years, something outside of business had completely captured his attention. And no matter how much he tried to deny it, he knew he wouldn't be able to move on unless he at least tried to find that girl again. The next morning, Ethan cancelled all his meetings, something he had never done before. Claire, his assistant, nearly choked when she got the call. "Cancel everything. Ethan, are you sick?" "No, I just need to handle a personal matter." There was silence on the other end of the line. In 5 years working together, personal matter had never been an acceptable excuse. "Are you sure? The meeting with the Japanese investor? Reschedule it for next week. Tell them an emergency came up." He hung up before she could protest further. He put on jeans and a simple t-shirt, clothes he rarely wore, and grabbed his car keys. "You're driving yourself today, sir?" asked the doorman, surprised to see him leaving without his driver. "Yes, Jorge. I need flexibility." He drove to the intersection where he had encountered the girl the previous night. He found a nearby parking spot and waited, watching the traffic. The light changed colors repeatedly. Street vendors offered water, candy, flowers. No sign of the little girl. After 2 hours, he decided to be more proactive. He approached a man selling bottled water from what looked like a fixed spot on that corner. "Excuse me," Ethan tried to sound casual. "I'm looking for a girl who usually stands at this intersection. Dark hair, about 9 years old." The man eyed him warily. "Why do you want to know?" Ethan hadn't considered how his question might sound. An adult man looking for a child he didn't know. "She gave me this yesterday." He showed the card. "I want to help her." The vendor examined the card, and his expression softened. "Oh, that's Sophie," he said at last. "She shows up here sometimes, but never at the same time. She's clever, that one. She doesn't trust people easily." Sophie. Now the girl had a name. "Do you know where I can find her?" The man hesitated. "Look, I'm not sure I should say anything. There are a lot of bad people out there, you know. I understand your concern." Ethan pulled out his wallet and offered some bills. "But I really want to help her." The vendor waved away the money. "No need for that. If you truly want to help her, try the park a couple of blocks away. She hangs around there when she's not by the traffic lights." Ethan thanked him and walked to the park. It was a simple space with some trees, worn benches, and a small playground. Children were playing under the watchful eyes of parents and nannies. Seniors were playing checkers at concrete tables. No sign of Sophie. He sat on a bench, feeling out of place. His phone kept vibrating with messages and emails he ignored. Another first for him. An older woman feeding pigeons on the nearby bench observed him curiously. "Are you looking for someone?" she finally asked. "A girl named Sophie," he replied, surprising even himself with his honesty. Dark hair, skinny, around 9 years old. The woman's eyes lit up in recognition. "Little Sophie, poor thing. You know her. I come here every day. She shows up sometimes, always alone. After her mother died, it's like a bird that lost its nest." The confirmation of her story made Ethan's heart clench. "Do you know what happened to her mother?" "An illness. Cancer, from what I heard." She fought it for a long time but didn't have money for proper treatment. Sophie would wait here while her mother did cleaning jobs in the neighborhood. No other relatives? The woman shook her head. Social services tried to find some, but no luck. They took her to a shelter, but she always runs away. Says it's too crowded, that the older kids scare her. Ethan absorbed the information, feeling a growing anger at a system that let a child prefer the streets over a supposedly safe shelter. Where does she sleep? She won't tell anyone. She's smart, knows how to protect herself. But if you want my advice, come back in the late afternoon. She usually stops by the sandwich cart before it closes for the day. Ethan thanked her and spent the rest of the day walking around the neighborhood, showing Sophie's card to local shop owners. Some recognized her, others looked away, uncomfortable being reminded of a poverty they'd rather ignore. A bookstore owner said Sophie sometimes came in to browse children's books. She never touches anything without permission, he said, unlike a lot of wealthy kids who come here. A fruit vendor mentioned giving her slightly bruised apples. She's always grateful, that girl. She's polite. Each piece of information built a clearer picture. Sophie wasn't just another statistic of abandonment. She was a real child, with a personality, habits, a story. In the late afternoon, Ethan returned to the park. He stayed at a discreet distance from the sandwich cart, waiting. When business slowed down and the owner began packing up, he noticed a small figure cautiously approaching. It was her. Even from afar, he recognized the dark hair and alert posture, like a wild animal always on guard. Sophie spoke briefly with the cart owner, who smiled and handed her a wrapped sandwich. She thanked him and turned to leave, then noticed Ethan. Her eyes widened in recognition, and for a moment, she looked ready to run. Ethan raised his hands to show he meant no harm and took a few steps toward her. She hesitated, clearly deciding whether or not to flee. "Sophie?" he called softly. She studied him warily. "How do you know my name?" "I asked around. You gave me this card yesterday." He saw surprise in her eyes, as if she hadn't expected anyone to care enough to look for her. "Why are you looking for me?" she asked, her voice a mixture of distrust and a faint, almost imperceptible hope. Ethan realized he didn't have a rehearsed answer. Why was he here? What did he expect to accomplish? "I wanted to see if I could help," he finally said, with the honesty that surprised even himself. Sophie observed him for a few moments more, her gaze far older than her years. "Nobody helps for free," she replied, her small voice carrying a bitterness far too heavy for a child her age. Ethan felt those words like a punch to the gut. In his world, everything had a price, a return. She was right to question his intentions. "How about we start with dinner?" he suggested. "No strings attached. Then you decide whether you want my help or not." Sophie clutched the sandwich to her chest, weighing his offer. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but somewhere public." An involuntary smile spread across Ethan's face. This child had more sense than many adults he knew. "Of course. You pick the place." Original text repeated paragraph. Translation remains consistent with the instructions to keep numbering and paragraphs intact. The next paragraph is the repeat from the user's text. We continue accordingly. The next morning, Ethan cancelled all his meetings, something he had never done before. Claire, his assistant, nearly choked when she got the call. "I cancel everything. Ethan, are you sick?" "No, I just need to handle a personal matter." There was silence on the other end of the line. In 5 years working together, personal matter had never been an acceptable excuse. "Are you sure? The meeting with the Japanese investors? Reschedule it for next week. Tell them an emergency came up." He hung up before she could protest further. He put on jeans and a simple t-shirt, clothes he rarely wore, and grabbed his car keys. "You're driving yourself today, sir?" asked the doorman, surprised to see him leaving without his driver. "Yes, Jorge. I need flexibility." He drove to the intersection where he had encountered the girl the previous night. He found a nearby parking spot and waited, watching the traffic. The light changed repeatedly. Street vendors offered water, candy, flowers. No sign of the little girl. After 2 hours, he decided to be more proactive. He approached a man selling bottled water who seemed to have a fixed spot. "Excuse me," Ethan tried to sound casual. "I'm looking for a girl who usually stands at this intersection. Dark hair, about 9 years old." The man eyed him warily. "Why do you want to know?" Ethan hadn't considered how his question might sound. An adult man looking for a child he didn't know. "She gave me this yesterday." He showed the card. "I want to help her." The vendor examined the card and his expression softened. "Oh, that's Sophie," he finally said. "She shows up here sometimes, but never on a schedule. She's a smart kid, doesn't trust people easily." Sophie. Now the girl had a name. "Do you know where I can find her?" The man hesitated. "Look, I'm not sure I should say anything. A lot of bad folks around, you know." "I understand." Ethan pulled out his wallet and offered a few bills. "But I really want to help her." The vendor declined the money with a gesture. "No need. If you really want to help the kid, try the park 2 blocks from here. She usually spends time there when she's not at the lights." Ethan thanked him and headed to the park. It was a simple space with some trees, worn benches, and a small playground. Children ran around under the supervision of moms and babysitters. Older folks played checkers at concrete tables. No sign of Sophie. He sat on a bench and waited, feeling out of place. His phone kept buzzing with messages and emails he ignored. Another first. An older woman feeding pigeons on a nearby bench watched him curiously. "Looking for someone?" she finally asked. "A girl named Sophie," he replied, surprised at his own candor. "Dark hair, skinny, about 9. The woman's eyes lit up in recognition. "Little Sophie. I used to see her here often, but it's been a few days now." "Do you know anything about her?" The woman shrugged. "Not much. She's a reserved child. I know she has nowhere to stay, from what I understand. I've tried to talk to her a few times, offer some help, but it's hard to earn her trust." "What about social services? Doesn't anyone do something?" "Oh, son," the woman sighed. "There are so many children on the streets. The system can't handle it all. They say they tried to take her to a shelter, but she always runs away." Ethan thanked her for the information and continued his search. He spent the rest of the day walking around the neighborhood, showing a quick photo he'd managed to snap of Sophie from the traffic light. A bookstore owner recognized Sophie. "She comes in sometimes, just to look at the children's books. Never touches anything without permission. Well-mannered, unlike some rich kids who come in." A fruit seller also knew her. "Sometimes I give her apples that are a bit bruised. She always thanks me." A diner waiter said Sophie sometimes appeared at lunchtime. "She just stares through the window. If there's extra food, I offer it to her. She never asks, you know, only thanks if we give something." Each piece of information only strengthened his resolve. Sophie wasn't just another abandoned statistic. She was a real person with her own personality and habits. Late in the afternoon, Ethan returned to the park and waited near the sandwich cart. The owner recognized him from his earlier questions. "Still looking for little Sophie?" the man asked as he packed up. "Yes, people said she might come here." The man nodded. "Usually, yes, but not today. I already prepared a sandwich for her if she shows up." He showed a wrapped package with care. "Is it all right if I wait?" "Sure, but I can't guarantee she'll come. She's unpredictable, like most homeless kids. She learned not to follow a routine. It's safer that way." Ethan waited until nightfall, but Sophie didn't show. He returned the next day and the next, always the same intersection, the same park. Nothing. It was as if she had disappeared. On the 4th day, Claire called, worried. "Ethan, what's going on? The investors are getting impatient. You've never been away this long." "I'm working on something important," he answered vaguely. "More important than your company?" The question caught him off guard. A week ago, he would have answered without hesitation that nothing was more important than his company. Now he wasn't so sure. "I just need a few more days," he finally said. He continued his search, expanding the area. He visited shelters, showed Sophie's photo. No one had seen her recently. A week passed. Exhausted and frustrated, Ethan stopped by a cafe to grab some coffee. He felt defeated. Maybe it was time to accept he wouldn't find the girl, that his sudden impulse to help someone would have to remain just an unfulfilled intention. While paying the bill, he overheard a conversation at the next table. Sleeping under the awning of that abandoned store on Sunflower Street, a girl so small, all alone. I called social services, but by the time they arrived, she was gone. Ethan froze, listening to every word. What did she look like? He asked, turning to face the table. The woman looked surprised at his intrusion. Oh, maybe 9 or 10. Dark hair, really skinny. Why? Sophie, he murmured. That must be Sophie. He left in a hurry, ignoring the puzzled looks. Sunflower Street was only a few blocks away. If Sophie was hiding in that area, maybe he still had a chance to find her. As he drove, a mix of anxiety and hope churned inside him. Why was he so obsessed with finding this one particular child? There were thousands of children in the city who needed help. What made Sophie different? He had no answer. He only knew that since reading that simple plea on the card, something had changed within him. He had to find her. He had to try helping. Even if it was just to prove to himself he could still feel something beyond ambition and boredom. When he reached Sunflower Street, the sun was already setting. The abandoned store was easy to spot. Broken windows, a dilapidated facade, a sad symbol of urban decay. He looked around, searching for any sign of Sophie, but the street was deserted. Resigned, he decided he'd return the next day. Something told him he was close to finding her, and for the first time in years, Ethan Carter felt he was doing something truly important. Ethan returned to Sunflower Street at first light the following morning. The place looked even more forlorn in the morning sun, peeling paint, trash piled on the sidewalks, a stark contrast to the upscale neighborhoods he usually frequented. He parked his car and walked around the abandoned building. He hesitated before circling it, scanning under the awning as the woman in the cafe had mentioned. With every step, questions he had no answers for filled his mind. Why couldn't he just forget this girl? Why had her story affected him so deeply when he heard sad stories all the time? Rounding the corner, he saw the awning and beneath it, a small huddled figure. His heart pounded. It was her, Sophie, sleeping on folded cardboard, using an old backpack as a pillow. Such a common sight in the city that most people walked by without noticing. But now in front of his eyes, it felt like an open wound in the reality he knew. He approached quietly, unsure how to proceed. Waking her might frighten her. Waiting nearby might also seem threatening. He opted to sit a safe distance away on a nearby step and wait. He didn't have to wait long. As if sensing someone's presence, Sophie woke with a start, sitting up abruptly. Her gaze swept the surroundings until it landed on Ethan. Recognition came immediately, followed by clear distrust. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice still hoarse from sleep, but her eyes fully alert. "I've been looking for you everywhere," he said honestly. "I heard someone mention a girl sleeping here." Sophie stood up quickly, gathering her few possessions with the skill of someone used to running. "Why are you looking for me? What do you want?" Ethan caught the fear in her voice. For a homeless child, a stranger was rarely good news. "Your card," he said, pulling it from his pocket. "You asked for help. I'm here to offer it." Sophie paused, staring at the small card in his hands. For a moment, she seemed surprised, as though she hadn't expected anyone to be moved by her words. "I hand out a lot of those," she admitted. "No one ever comes back." The simplicity of her confession hit Ethan hard. How many times had she asked for help, only to be ignored? How many people, like he almost had, he took the card and never bothered to read it? "I'm hungry," Ethan said suddenly. "Know any good place for breakfast around here?" The abrupt change of subject caught Sophie off guard. She hesitated, studying him as if trying to decipher his real intentions. "There's a bakery on the corner," she replied at last. "The owner sometimes gives me yesterday's bread. Would you like to join me?" "My treat," Sophie clutched her backpack, clearly sizing up the risks. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I want to help, and because I'm also hungry." After a few seconds that felt eternal. Sophie nodded. "Fine, but in the bakery, a public place." Ethan smiled, admiring her caution. "Sure. You lead the way." The bakery was a simple establishment, but clean and welcoming. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. The owner, a middle-aged woman, widened her eyes upon seeing Sophie enter, accompanied by a well-dressed man. "Sophie, what a surprise to see you coming in through the front door," the woman teased kindly. "He invited me," Sophie explained, pointing at Ethan. The woman studied him with barely disguised suspicion. Ethan felt her scrutiny and, oddly, was grateful for it. It was good to know someone was looking out for Sophie, even from a distance. "Can we sit here?" he asked, indicating a table near the window. The owner nodded, still watchful. "I'll bring the menu." Sophie perched on the edge of the chair, ready to bolt at any sign of danger. Ethan tried to appear as casual as possible. "What do you recommend here?" "The cheese bread is good," she replied hesitantly, "and the hot chocolate." When the owner returned, Ethan ordered 2 complete breakfasts, everything the bakery offered. Sophie's eyes widened, but she didn't object. "So," Ethan began, trying to start a conversation, "how long have you been on the streets?" Sophie looked away, suddenly fascinated by the tablecloth. "A few months," she answered vaguely. The food arrived: eggs, bread, cheese, fruit, juice, coffee for Ethan, hot chocolate for Sophie. Her eyes shone at the sight of so much food, but she held herself back, eating slowly, with manners surprisingly polite for someone in her situation. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," Ethan said, noticing her discomfort. "I just want to help if you'll let me." Sophie studied him over her cup of chocolate. "Why? You don't even know me." It was a fair question. Why was he, a man who spent his life calculating gains and losses, so determined to help a stranger's child? "Your card," he answered candidly. "What you wrote made me think. Made me realize maybe I could do something other than just follow my routine." Sophie continued eating in silence, apparently considering his words. By the time she finished, she seemed a bit more relaxed. Ethan noticed she discreetly saved a small piece of bread in her pocket, likely for later, an instinct of someone who doesn't know when the next meal will come. "My mom died 4 months ago," she said suddenly, staring at the remainder of her hot chocolate. "It was just the 2 of us always." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "I'm sorry." "She was a housekeeper, worked in big homes, like the ones you probably own," Sophie continued, her voice quiet but steady. "She always said she'd give me a better life. She put me in school, bought me books when she could, did everything so I could learn. Said education was the one thing nobody could take away from me." Ethan listened, absorbing every word. "When she got sick, she kept working, even when she was too weak to clean properly. We had no money for good doctors. By the time we got a spot in the public hospital, it was too late." The bluntness with which she described her personal tragedy clashed with the evident pain in her eyes, like someone who had grown up too fast, forced to face realities no child should know. "After she died, some social workers took me to a shelter. It was crowded, noisy. Older kids stole our stuff, and the adults barely had time for everyone. I ran away after a week." "Did they try to find you?" Sophie shrugged. "Maybe, but there are so many kids on the streets. I'm just one more." The simplicity of her statement weighed on Ethan. To the world, she was just a number. To him, until a few days ago, she would have been just another anonymous face at a traffic light. Since then, I've managed. Some people help. The bakery lady, the bookstore owner, the fruit seller. I sleep wherever I can, always a different place. I do odd jobs, hand out those cards at traffic lights. And school. You can't go to school when you don't have a permanent address, she replied, as if it were obvious, or when you're worried about where you'll sleep at night. As Sophie recounted her story, Ethan felt something shifting inside him. For the first time, he wasn't listening with half his attention. thinking about emails to answer or contracts to review. He wasn't calculating how this conversation could benefit him. He was simply present, witnessing the pain and strength of a child who kept going despite all odds. "Do you know what my mom always said?" Sophie continued, now with a small smile. "She said that even in the worst situations, there's still kindness in the world. You just have to find the right person." That sentence hit Ethan unexpectedly. It was so simple, yet so profound, and somehow he felt that he needed to be that person for Sophie. "Sophie," he said, surprised at the firmness in his own voice, "I can't change what happened to you. I can't bring your mom back, but I can offer you a safe place to stay, at least for now." The offer hung between them. Sophie looked at him with a mixture of hope and distrust. Why? What do you get out of it? A valid question, one he wasn't sure he could fully answer. "Maybe I need this as much as you do," he said honestly. "Maybe I need to remember there's more to life than work and money." Sophie kept studying him, her gaze far older than it should be for her age. "Do you have a big house?" she finally asked. "I have a pretty spacious apartment," he answered, surprised by the change of subject. "With a spare room?" "Yes, a few." Sophie nodded slowly. "Can I leave whenever I want?" "Of course. It's not a prison. What if it doesn't work out? What if I don't like it, or you don't like me?" Her practical worry, so adult in nature, made Ethan's heart ache again. "Then we'll find another solution. Together. But I won't just send you back to the streets." Sophie went silent for a long moment. Finally, she extended her small dirty hand across the table. "Okay, but it's temporary, just to see how it goes." Ethan took her hand, feeling a mix of relief and enormous responsibility. He had just made a decision that would change both of their lives and, he hoped, for the better. Deal. Temporary. He paid the bill, leaving a generous tip that made the owner's eyes widen. As they left, the woman grabbed Ethan's arm. "Take good care of her," she whispered, half warning, half plea. "I will," he promised, with a conviction he had never felt before. On the way to the car, Sophie walked beside him, still cautious but with a small glimmer of hope in her eyes. Ethan realized he had just taken on a responsibility for which he had no preparation. He didn't know how to care for a child. He had no idea what challenges lay ahead. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was doing something genuinely important. Ethan's apartment seemed even bigger through Sophie's eyes. On that first day, she walked cautiously through the rooms, as if afraid of breaking something or leaving marks on the spotless floor. Her eyes grew wide at every detail: the paintings on the walls, the leather sofas, the huge TV in the living room, the sweeping view of the city from the panoramic window. "This will be your room," Ethan said, opening the door to one of the guest rooms. It was a spacious, elegant space, decorated in neutral tones like the rest of the apartment, impersonal but comfortable. Sophie stepped inside hesitantly, her worn backpack looking out of place against the sophisticated decor. "Can I really stay here?" she asked, voice almost a whisper. "Of course, it's all yours." She touched the king-size bed with her fingertips, as if testing its reality. "I've never slept in a bed this big." That first night, Ethan discovered he had no idea what a child needed for dinner. His fridge only held leftover gourmet takeout and some fruit. They ended up ordering pizza, which made Sophie's eyes light up momentarily. "Eat as much as you want," he said when he noticed her taking only a small slice. "I'm saving the rest for tomorrow," she replied matter-of-factly. The statement hit him like a punch. She still thought like someone who had to secure the next meal. "Sophie, you don't have to store food here. We'll always have more." She studied him with wary eyes, but nodded slightly. In the following mornings, Ethan realized his meticulously planned schedule had been completely disrupted. He could no longer leave at 6:30 a.m. for the office after a quick workout and breakfast. Now he had to prepare breakfast for two, make sure Sophie had what she needed for the day, and coordinate times to get back home. His first attempt at scrambling eggs resulted in a burnt mess that made Sophie stifle a laugh. The first genuinely happy sound he'd heard from her. "You've never cooked before?" she asked, watching him scrape the pan. "Rarely," he admitted. "I usually order takeout or eat out." "My mom taught me a few things," Sophie offered, approaching the stove cautiously. "I can show you." That morning, Sophie prepared perfect scrambled eggs while Ethan watched her precise, confident movements. It was strange to see a child so small, so at ease with domestic chores. Another consequence of a life where growing up fast wasn't an option, but a necessity. On the third day, Claire called, irritated at his prolonged absence. "Ethan, the investors are furious. The board is demanding an explanation. You've never disappeared like this." "I need a few more days, Claire," he said, watching Sophie leaf through a book from his shelf. "Days? Ethan, what is going on? Are you sick? Do you need a doctor?" "I'm fine. I'm just dealing with a personal matter." "Personal? Since when do you have personal matters?" The question hung in the air. Claire was right. Until that week, his life had been entirely consumed by work, leaving no room for personal issues. "Things have changed," he said simply. "I'll be back next week." He hung up before she could protest further. Over the ensuing days, Ethan realized he needed to establish a routine for Sophie. He bought new clothes for her, surprisingly complex, as she insisted she didn't need many things, but he insisted on getting her the basics. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked while trying on a new pair of sneakers. "You don't have to spend so much on me. You need these things," he replied simply, "and I can afford them." Sophie put on the sneakers, looking at her feet, torn between gratitude and the fear of getting attached to something she might lose. In the first week, Ethan noticed Sophie had nightmares. He'd hear her small whimpers in the night but hesitated to invade her space. One particularly bad night, when the sounds turned into muffled sobs, he finally knocked gently on the door. "Sophie, everything okay?" Silence. Then a small voice. "Yes. Can I come in?" More silence. Then, "Okay." He found her sitting up in bed, knees pulled to her chest, tears staining her cheeks. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "Do you want to talk about it?" Sophie shook her head. "Do you want me to stay a bit? We don't have to talk." A slight nod. Ethan picked up a book from the bedside table. "Can I read you something?" Another nod. He started reading, his soft voice filling the silence of the room. When he looked again, Sophie had drifted off to sleep. For the first time, he felt he was truly helping. A routine took shape naturally. Breakfast together, a few hours of remote work for him while Sophie read or drew, lunch, an afternoon outing, to the park, the bookstore, or the grocery store, and dinner. It was a simple life, radically different from the hectic schedule he once kept. Sophie, for her part, watched Ethan's every move with cautious eyes, as if constantly expecting him to show signs of regret or impatience. She kept her few belongings neatly in her room, ready to leave at any moment. She never asked for anything, quietly accepting what was offered. One night, while Ethan was making pasta, he could now cook a few basic dishes. He noticed Sophie observing him thoughtfully. "What is it?" he asked gently. "Don't you have to go to work? You do have a job, right?" Ethan smiled. "Yes, I own a company. I'm working from home for now." "Because of me?" The direct question caught him off guard. "Yes, partly. I want to make sure you feel comfortable here before I go back to my normal routine." Sophie was silent for a moment, processing this. "You don't have to change your life for me. I can take care of myself." Ethan's heart ached. No child should have to take care of themselves. "I know you're capable, Sophie. You've proven that. But now we're in this together, okay? And sometimes it's good to have someone to count on." She nodded, not entirely convinced, but a bit more at ease. On the 10th day, Ethan took Sophie to the park. While she timidly played on the swing, keeping her distance from other children, he watched her with a strange feeling in his chest. Protection. He felt an overwhelming need to protect this girl who, despite everything, still carried a spark of hope in her eyes. He was so distracted that he almost didn't notice his phone ringing. It was Claire again. "Ethan, we need you here, today. No excuses." He sighed, looking over at Sophie. "I can't, Claire. What's going on? Everyone is speculating. Some think you're ill, others think you're planning to sell the company. None of that, I'm just..." He hesitated, unsure how to explain. "I'm taking care of someone." "Taking care? You? Of who?" "A girl. She needed help." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Did you adopt a child?" Claire asked finally, incredulous. "Not officially. It's temporary." "I think..." More silence was then. "Ethan Carter, what happened to you?" The question echoed in his mind long after they hung up. What had happened to him? In just 10 days, his life had turned upside down. His once clear priorities now seemed distant and superficial. He watched Sophie get off the swing and walk toward him, a faint smile on her face. That's when he realized that, for the first time in years, he felt genuinely useful, not as a CEO or a businessman, but as a human being. That night, he made dinner while Sophie set the table, a new routine they'd established. She still moved around the apartment cautiously, but no longer seemed as out of place as she had during those first days. "Ethan?" she called as they ate. "Yes." "How long am I going to stay here?" The question was simple, direct, but loaded with meaning. Ethan realized he dreaded that question as much as she did. This temporary arrangement was slowly turning into something neither of them wanted to define or limit. "How long would you like to stay?" he asked in return. Sophie toyed with her food, avoiding his gaze. "I don't know, but I like it here." "Then stay as long as you want," he responded simply. "This is your home now, if you want it to be." She looked up, studying his face for any sign of deceit or hesitation. Finding only sincerity, she nodded slightly. "Thanks," she whispered. That night, for the first time, Ethan realized this new routine, so different from anything he'd known, was fast becoming the only thing that made sense to him. After 2 weeks with Sophie, Ethan finally returned to the office. He could no longer postpone his responsibilities, no matter how much he wanted to stay home with her. He hired a babysitter recommended by his neighbor, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Martin, whose calm kindness quickly gained Sophie's cautious trust. "I'll call every hour to check on you," he promised Sophie before leaving, "and I'll be back for lunch." She nodded, trying to appear indifferent, but her eyes revealed the anxiety of being left behind. "You don't have to worry about me, I've been alone before." "But now you're not alone," he said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "Now you have me." When he arrived at the office, 20 minutes past his usual time, he noticed the startled looks. Ethan Carter, the CEO who used to arrive before everyone, was now rushing in with a slightly crooked tie and a jelly stain on his sleeve. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," said the receptionist, barely hiding her curiosity. The whispers followed him through the hallways. He caught snippets of conversation. Totally different. "Never been late before. Did you see that stain on his sleeve?" Ignoring the comments, he made his way to his office, where Claire waited with a mix of relief and exasperation. "Finally," she said, handing him a stack of documents. "I thought I'd have to reschedule the 9 o'clock meeting." "Again." "Nice to see you too, Claire," he replied, checking his phone. No messages from Mrs. Martin. "Good. The meeting with the Japanese investors is set for this afternoon. The quarterly report needs your signature by noon, and the board demands an explanation for your absences." Ethan nodded absently, still glancing at his phone. "Are you listening to me?" "Yes." "Japanese and report fiends board," he repeated automatically. "I'll handle everything." He sat at his desk and began reviewing documents, but his mind kept drifting to Sophie. Was she comfortable with Mrs. Martin? Had she eaten a proper breakfast? What if she had a nightmare while he was gone? The 9 o'clock meeting was a disaster. He lost track of the presentation several times, forgot important names, and even yawned in the middle of a crucial discussion. The executives exchanged puzzled looks. This was not the Ethan Carter they knew, the man whose attention to detail was legendary. When everyone left, Claire closed the meeting room door and faced him. "What was that?" "You seemed like you were on another planet." "I'm sorry, I'm a bit distracted." "A bit? Ethan, you just proposed a strategy we discussed and rejected 3 months ago." He sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. He hadn't slept well the night before. He'd stayed up listening for any sounds in the apartment, worried Sophie might need him. "I know I haven't been myself lately." "That's an understatement." She crossed her arms. "Rumors are all over the place. Some people think you're sick. Others think you're secretly selling the company. Ricardo in accounting even bet you're having an affair with a married woman." Ethan almost laughed at the irony. "None of the above." "Then what is it?" "Because in 5 years I've never seen you like this. Distracted, arriving late. This isn't you." He hesitated. He hadn't planned to tell anyone about Sophie so soon. He wasn't even sure how to explain it. He was still figuring it out himself. But Claire deserved the truth. "Remember when I was gone for nearly 2 weeks? How could I forget? It was chaos. I found someone." "A little girl?" Claire's eyes widened. "A little girl. Not like you think," he hurried to clarify. "She's 9, homeless. Her name is Sophie." Claire's expression went from shock to confusion. "I'm lost. What does this girl have to do with you?" "She gave me a card at a traffic light asking for help," he explained, feeling strangely vulnerable. "I couldn't ignore it. I looked for her, found her sleeping under an awning, and now she's living with me." The silence that followed was deafening. Claire looked at him as if he'd just announced he was quitting everything to join the circus. "You brought a homeless child into your home?" she repeated slowly, testing whether the sentence made sense. "I know how it sounds." And yes, it was impulsive, maybe even irresponsible. But she had no one, Claire, no one. To his surprise, Claire didn't scold him. Instead, she took a seat at the table, genuinely intrigued. "What's she like?" "Smart, really smart, and tough in the way only kids who've been through a lot can be. She cooks better than I do, keeps her things organized, never complains. Sometimes I catch myself staring at her, wondering how someone so young can be so resilient." As he spoke, Ethan realized how much Sophie had impacted his life in such a short time, how her presence had transformed previously empty spaces into something alive, meaningful. "I never thought about caring for anyone like this, but I can't just ignore her, Claire. She needs help." Claire studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a small smile appeared. "I think you finally found something that really matters." The simplicity of her observation caught him off guard. It was true. Amidst all his professional achievements and material gains, he'd never felt the sense of purpose he felt now, caring for Sophie. "So what's your plan long term?" Claire asked. "You can't just keep a child without any legal formality." "I'm consulting a lawyer about temporary custody," he admitted. "It's complicated, but I'm willing to face the bureaucracy." Claire nodded thoughtfully. "You'll need help. We can rearrange your schedule, prioritize meetings that need your physical presence, move others to video conferences. You don't think I'm crazy?" "I think I'm seeing the Ethan Carter who's always been under the workaholic obsessed with control," she replied with a genuine smile. "And honestly, I like this Ethan better." Before he could respond, his phone rang. It was Mrs. Martin. His heart skipped a beat as he answered. "Mr. Carter," said the woman, "sorry to bother you, but Sophie has a fever. It doesn't seem serious, but she asked for you." "I'm on my way," he replied without hesitation. He hung up and looked at Claire. "I have to go. Sophie's not feeling well." To his surprise, Claire was already gathering his documents. "Go. I'll handle things here. I'll call you if it's truly urgent." "Thank you, Claire." As he hurried out of the office, feeling the curious gazes of employees watching him leave mid-morning, Ethan realized something fundamental had changed. For the first time, his priority wasn't work, success, or status. It was a small girl who had somehow become the most important thing in his life. Ethan got home in record time. He found Mrs. Martin in the kitchen, brewing tea, while Sophie lay curled up on the couch under a blanket. "Her fever's not too high," Mrs. Martin said quietly, but she got upset when she realized she wasn't feeling well. Ethan approached the couch carefully. Sophie looked at him through feverish eyes, a vulnerability on her face she rarely showed. "Hey," he said gently, sitting down beside her. "Heard you're not feeling too great." Sophie averted her gaze. "You didn't have to come. It's not that bad." "Of course I had to come. That's what I'm here for." Silence fell between them. Ethan realized that despite the weeks they'd spent together, Sophie still held onto her protective barriers. She trusted him enough to live under his roof, but not enough to show real vulnerability. "Can I check your temperature?" he asked, showing her the thermometer Mrs. Martin had given him. Sophie nodded slightly. It was 100.8 degrees, enough to explain her discomfort. "I'll make you something light to eat, and then you can take some medicine, okay?" "Not hungry," she muttered. "You still need something so the medicine works." As he prepared a simple soup in the kitchen, Ethan reflected on how caring for someone who was sick was completely new to him. He'd never been concerned about anyone else's well-being like this. Sophie ate a few spoonfuls of the soup and took the fever reducer without complaining. Mrs. Martin said her goodbyes, promising to return the next day. "You don't have to miss work because of me," Sophie said once they were alone. "Don't worry about that, just rest, okay?" She fell asleep on the couch and Ethan gently carried her to her room. Laying a blanket over her, he noticed how tiny she looked in the large bed, a reminder that despite her forced maturity, she was still just a child. The night was long. Ethan checked on Sophie every hour, anxious about her fluctuating fever. Around 3 a.m., he jolted awake to the sound of screams coming from her room. He rushed in to find her sitting up, eyes wide with terror, still gripped by a nightmare. Sweat dripped from her forehead, and her body was visibly trembling. "Sophie," he said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "It was just a dream. You're safe." She looked at him, her eyes gradually refocusing on reality. For a moment, it seemed she would pull away, as she always did when he got too close. But then, to Ethan's surprise, she threw herself into his arms, sobbing. It was the first time Sophie had initiated physical contact. Ethan held her gently, feeling her small body trembling against his. "I dreamed they took me away," she whispered between sobs. "That they were taking me out of here." "Nobody's going to take you away," he promised, running a hand through her hair. "You don't have to be afraid here. No one will hurt you." She pulled back slightly to look at him, as if measuring the sincerity of his words. "Promise?" "I promise." Sophie visibly relaxed. Instead of moving back to her side of the bed, she stayed close to Ethan, as though his presence protected her from the nightmares. "Do you want me to stay until you fall asleep again?" She nodded, settling back under the covers. Ethan sat in the armchair beside the bed, watching as she fought off sleep, still scared the nightmare might return. "My mom used to sing to me when I had nightmares," Sophie murmured, eyes already closed. "I don't know how to sing," Ethan admitted with a smile. "That might be more of a nightmare than a help." A small smile appeared on Sophie's face, a rare and precious sight. "I can tell you a story if you want," he offered. "Okay." Ethan began an improvised tale about a little star that fell from the sky and was trying to find its way back. Before he reached the midpoint, Sophie was already asleep, her breathing calm and steady. He stayed there, keeping watch over her, feeling a strange mix of protectiveness and gratitude. That small moment of trust, Sophie turning to him for comfort, meant more to him than any professional achievement he'd ever had. In the days that followed, something subtly shifted between them. The fever had passed, but the wall Sophie kept around herself seemed to have lowered. She started asking questions about his life, sharing small stories about her own, seeking him out when she needed something instead of trying to handle it all alone. Ethan, for his part, grew more accustomed to the role of caregiver. He rearranged his work schedule to be home for important times, breakfast, dinner, bedtime. He learned what foods Sophie liked, how to read the signs when she was anxious or sad, and when to respect her space if she needed solitude. Small rituals took shape naturally. Reading before bed, Sunday walks in the park, Friday night movies with popcorn. Each shared moment was a tiny step toward building something that increasingly resembled a family. One day, while they washed dishes together after dinner, Sophie meticulously drying each plate, she asked casually, "Do you think I'll ever have to leave here?" The question took Ethan by surprise. He put down the glass he was washing, considering his answer carefully. "Not if I can help it," he finally said. "But there are laws and procedures we have to follow. I'm working with a lawyer to make sure you can stay if that's what you want." Sophie nodded, absorbing the information. "That's what I want," she said simply, turning her attention back to the plate she was drying. Ethan felt his heart swell with an emotion he couldn't fully name. It was deeper than happiness, more complex than pride. It was the sense of finally being on the right path after years of going in the wrong direction. One Saturday morning, Ethan watched Sophie leafing through an old book she'd found in his collection. Her small fingers gently touched the pages, her eyes devouring every word with the hunger of someone who had been deprived of something precious. "Do you like reading?" he asked, sitting beside her. "My mom used to say that books are windows to other worlds," she replied, not taking her eyes off the page. "At school, I always went to the library during recess." The casual mention of school made Ethan realize something he'd been neglecting. Sophie had been out of formal education for months. Amid all the adjustments, schooling had taken a back seat. "Do you miss school?" Sophie shrugged, but her expression said otherwise. "A little. I liked learning new things." That same afternoon, Ethan took her to a large bookstore. Sophie's eyes widened at the towering shelves. "Can I look at the children's books?" she asked timidly. "You can look at any books you want, and pick some to take home." "How many?" "As many as you can carry." It was the first time he saw a genuine, full smile brighten her entire face. As she explored the children's section with the care of an archaeologist on a precious dig, Ethan found himself smiling too. The bookstore visit was just the beginning. In the following days, he took her to a museum, to a small water park, to a science fair. He watched her face transform with the wonder of simple discoveries most children took for granted. During a trip to the botanical garden, while Sophie examined an exotic flower, Ethan had an epiphany. For years, he'd measured success in numbers, profits, stocks, market growth. Now, he found a profound joy in something as simple as watching a child discover the beauty of a plant. "Did you know this flower only blooms once a year?" he explained to Sophie. "That's why it's so special to see it now." Sophie looked at the flower, then at him. "Like us," she said simply. "What do you mean?" "We only met that one time. If you hadn't stopped at that light on that specific day." Her perspective left him momentarily speechless. How much of life hinged on small decisions, fleeting moments that could so easily never have happened. On the way back, they stopped for ice cream. Sophie, with chocolate smudges on her face, suddenly said, "I never thought anyone would really care about me." The statement, uttered so plainly, hit Ethan like lightning. He realized it wasn't just Sophie's life that was changing, his was too. "I care," he replied simply. Sophie smiled, a small smile packed with meaning. And Ethan understood that he had found something no professional success could ever offer, a purpose beyond himself. That night, as he tidied up the kitchen, he reflected on how drastically his life had changed. The workaholic executive, obsessed with deadlines and profits, now worried about grocery shopping for school lunches and reading bedtime stories. And the most surprising part was that he didn't miss his old life. Even though he'd never considered having children, taking care of Sophie felt as natural as breathing. It was a responsibility that, instead of weighing him down, gave meaning to each day. When he checked on Sophie before bed, he found her already asleep, clutching one of her new books. He gently tucked the blanket around her small shoulders and allowed himself a moment to feel the wave of protectiveness that welled up whenever he looked at her. Sophie, with her cautious distrust and extraordinary resilience, had become as much a safe harbor for him as he was for her. The corridors of Carter Tech buzzed with rumors. In the 3 weeks since Ethan had returned to work with a completely different routine, speculation had only grown. The man who used to be first in and last out now arrived promptly at 8:30 a.m. and rarely stayed past 5 p.m. Meetings that once stretched into late evening were abruptly cut short when his phone rang from a certain caller. "They say he's got a new girlfriend," an intern remarked over morning coffee. "A girlfriend? He's never had time for relationships," a colleague responded. "I bet he's got a serious health issue." "I heard he's secretly negotiating a sale of the company," whispered another employee. "That's why all these mysterious absences and private calls." In his office, oblivious to the gossip, Ethan was wrapping up a video conference with foreign investors. Years ago, he would have insisted on an in-person meeting, flying around the world if needed. Now the practicality of doing it all remotely seemed obvious. Claire entered without knocking, her habit since taking on more responsibilities. "The board meeting got moved up to Thursday," she said, placing a folder on his desk. "And Ricardo is panicking about your plan to pause the Nexus project." "Nexus can wait. We have more important things now." "Like the social housing initiative you launched out of nowhere," Ethan smiled faintly. That project was inspired by a conversation with Sophie about what it was like living on the streets. Using the company foundation's funds, he'd started a program to provide temporary housing for homeless families, especially single mothers with children. "Exactly. And also the new scholarship program." Claire folded her arms, eyeing him with a mix of admiration and concern. "Shareholders are uneasy, Ethan. Your sudden focus on social projects, the changed schedule, the rumors. Some are questioning if you're still committed to the company's growth." "The company's never been better," he replied calmly. "Last quarter's numbers were the best in our history. Still, people notice the change." "You used to be—" She hesitated, looking for the right word. "Ruthless." Ethan pondered that. It was true. For years, he was known for his almost obsessive determination, his willingness to sacrifice everything, relationships, health, for the company's success. That reputation had preceded him for so long that now, when he finally sought balance, people suspected something was wrong. "Priorities change, Claire. Because of Sophie. Because of what Sophie showed me," he corrected her. "There's a whole world outside these walls that I was ignoring. Real people, with real problems, that we can help." Claire sat in the chair opposite his desk, her expression turning serious. "Ethan, are you absolutely sure about what you're doing? Taking on this responsibility can change your entire life." The question lingered, loaded with significance. It was no longer just about work hours or new projects. It was about the fundamental transformation Sophie had sparked in his life and the consequences that would follow. He thought for a moment before answering. "It already has changed my life. And for the first time, that doesn't scare me." Claire nodded slowly, as if finally understanding something essential about him. "In that case, we need a better strategy. Not to hide what's happening, but to integrate it into your public life." "What do you mean?" "Eventually, the media will discover Sophie. You're a public figure, Ethan. A tech billionaire suddenly taking in a homeless child, that's a headline." Ethan felt a chill. He hadn't considered the media aspect. Sophie had been through enough. The last thing she needed was public scrutiny. "I don't want to expose her. Maybe you won't have to." Claire picked up her tablet. "We can stay ahead of it. Issue an official statement on your terms without sensationalism. And we can use it to highlight your new social initiatives." Ethan shook his head, annoyed at the suggestion. "I'm not using Sophie as a marketing ploy, Claire. That's not what I mean. I'm talking about controlled transparency versus uncontrolled rumors. If we don't tell the story, someone else will, and they'll probably spin it into something sensational." He considered her words, Claire was right about one thing: the story would eventually get out. When it did, the media would try to frame it as a redemption arc for a ruthless billionaire or some other cynical angle. "I'll think about it," he conceded, "but nothing happens until I talk to Sophie first. It's her life too." As he left the office that afternoon, Ethan already had 3 calls from board members worried about the rumors regarding his personal projects. One of them, a veteran investor who had backed him from the start, was especially blunt. "Ethan, we're hearing stories about you taking in a homeless child. If it's true, you need to reconsider. This sort of situation could become a legal nightmare, not to mention the impact on your reputation, and by extension, the company." The old Ethan would have caved to the pressure, weighed the risks, calculated the pros and cons, and chosen the path that safeguarded his enterprise and fortune, even at the cost of personal attachments, but that Ethan no longer existed. "I appreciate your concern," he replied firmly, "but my decision is made, and I suggest the company prepare for some changes in our approach to social responsibility." When he arrived home, he found Sophie and Mrs. Martin at the kitchen table, poring over schoolwork. After consulting an education specialist, Ethan had hired tutors to help Sophie catch up on what she'd missed. "How was the studying today?" he asked, placing his briefcase on the counter. "Math is easy," Sophie said with a small smile, "but history is confusing. Too many dates." "She's very smart," Mrs. Martin added. "She picked up in 3 days what some kids take weeks to learn." Ethan smiled, feeling the pride that had become a regular part of his life. Sophie really was extraordinary. Her ability to absorb knowledge, her resilience, her kindness despite everything she'd endured. After Mrs. Martin left, as they made dinner together, another new routine they both enjoyed, Ethan casually brought up his conversation with Claire. "Some people at work are curious about you," he said, choosing his words carefully. "And Claire thinks the media might find out we live together." Sophie stopped chopping vegetables, her expression suddenly guarded. "Is that bad?" "Not necessarily, but it might mean people start asking questions, taking pictures, that kind of thing. Will that be a problem for you?" "For your work." Her concern for his well-being rather than her own was so typical of Sophie that it made his chest tighten. "I don't care what they say about me," he said honestly. "I just worry about your privacy and your comfort." Sophie resumed chopping vegetables, absorbing the information. "When I was on the streets, I learned how to be invisible," she said finally. "People look right through you like you don't exist. Now they're going to see me too much." The wisdom in that simple observation impressed him once again. We can control it, at least partially. Decide what we share, what remains private. "You won't kick me out if it gets too complicated." The question, spoken softly, revealed that her fear of abandonment still lingered deep inside her. "Never," he stated firmly. "No matter what happens, we're in this together. Got it?" She nodded, a small smile returning to her lips. That night, after Sophie went to bed, Ethan sent a message to Claire. "Let's move forward with your plan. On our terms, and get the legal team ready. We're expanding our social projects significantly. Anyone who's not on board can invest somewhere else." For the first time in his life, Ethan Carter was openly challenging the expectations of the corporate world that had always defined his existence. He was ignoring warnings, veiled threats, pressure to conform, all because a little girl with a handwritten card had awakened something in him he never knew he possessed: the courage to do what was right, not just what was profitable or safe. 3 months after Sophie moved in, Ethan made a decision that had been growing in his heart. He wanted to legally formalize his relationship with her. No longer was it enough to be a temporary guardian. He wanted to give Sophie the certainty of a permanent home. He scheduled a meeting with Marina Fields, a family law attorney his company had worked with on social projects, a woman renowned for her expertise and discretion. She received him in her office on a Friday afternoon. "So you want to file for the legal custody of the girl," she summarized after hearing the entire story. "Ethan, I must be honest. It won't be a simple process. I'm prepared for that, he replied, determined. What do we need to do? First, we'll need all of Sophie's documentation, birth certificate, school records, medical records, whatever we can find. She doesn't have much with her. She only had a backpack when I found her. Then we'll have to do some investigating. Her full name will help locate her records. We'll also need a home study, proof you have adequate conditions, which clearly isn't an issue, and evidence of an established emotional bond. What if we find biological family? They might have rights. We'll conduct a thorough search. If her mother is deceased and no father is on record, as you mentioned, we'll look for grandparents, uncles, any close relatives. We have to exhaust every possibility before a judge considers awarding custody to someone with no blood ties. Ethan felt a knot in his stomach. The idea that some distant relative might appear and take Sophie away frightened him more than any business crisis he'd faced. What if relatives do show up and she doesn't want to go with them? Her opinion will be taken into account, especially given her age, but it's not definitive. The judge will decide based on what's in the child's best interest. He left the attorney's office with a list of required documents and the sense that he was diving into a far more complex process than he'd imagined. Driving home, he reflected on how something seemingly straightforward, providing a home for a child, could involve such bureaucratic hurdles. In the following weeks, Ethan and his legal team began gathering information. Sophie cooperated as best she could, sharing details about her life before living on the streets, the name of her old school, the neighborhood where they'd lived, the hospital where her mother had been treated. One rainy Tuesday, while working in his home office, Ethan received an email from the investigative team. They had located Sophie's school records and chow-chow-ing with that, found her full birth certificate and other documents. Attached were scanned copies of all the documents they'd uncovered. Ethan first opened the birth certificate, verifying basic information. Sophie Bennett Castro, born 9 years ago in New York City. His gaze drifted to the parental field. The father's name was blank, but the mother's was there in full. Julia Bennett Castro. Julia Bennett. Time seemed to stop for a moment. That name, which he hadn't heard or thought of in over a decade, now leapt off the screen like a ghost made flesh. Julia Bennett. It couldn't be a coincidence. Bennett wasn't a common last name. And Julia? How many Julias Bennett could there be in New York? With trembling hands, he opened the other files in the email. One contained a copy of Sophie's mother's ID. The photo, though small and slightly blurry, left no doubt. It was her. Julia. His Julia. Memories long buried came rushing back like a flood. Julia Bennett, the literature student who used to sit next to him in economics electives, the girl with the easy smile and strong opinions, who challenged professors without fear, who wrote poetry in the margins of her notebooks. The friend who spent countless late nights listening to his ambitious plans while sharing her own dreams of becoming a writer. Julia, with whom he spent hours in the library, in cafes, walking around campus. Julia, who always believed he could change the world, not just make money. Julia, whom he promised never to forget once college was over. A promise he'd completely broken. After graduation, Ethan had thrown himself into his career. Her emails became less frequent, eventually stopping. At some point, they lost contact. He moved on, built his empire, forgot the idealistic girl who had once meant so much. And now he discovered she had died. Alone. Poor. Fighting an illness that might have been treatable if she'd had resources. If she'd had help, if he had kept in touch. Guilt slammed into him with devastating force. How different things might have been if he hadn't let their friendship die. If he'd looked for her, if he'd been there when she needed him most. Ethan? Sophie's voice pulled him back to the present. She stood at the office door, looking at him curiously. "Are you okay? You look weird." Ethan tried to compose himself, but tears threatened. Sophie walked closer, worried. She'd never seen him cry. "What happened?" Ethan took a deep breath before answering. "I knew your mother. She was a very close friend of mine. Sophie's eyes widened in surprise. You knew my mom? How? When? In college. We studied together for 4 years. We were really close. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I didn't know, he explained gently. I didn't realize the Julia you mentioned was the same person I knew. I just found out now, looking at these documents. Sophie came closer to the computer, looking at her mother's photo on the screen. Her fingers traced the monitor softly, as if trying to reach through the glass. What was she like in college? Ethan smiled through tears. Brilliant, stubborn, full of ideals. She wrote amazing poetry and talked about literature with the same passion I had for technology and business. Sophie's face lit up. She kept writing poetry. She used to read it to me before bed. The small confirmation that the Julia he knew had stayed true to herself, even in hardship, brought Ethan a bittersweet solace. Did she change a lot? He asked, wary of the answer. Sophie considered it. I don't know how she was before, but she was always smiling, even when she was sick. She said life was too short to waste on sadness. It was so characteristic of Julia that Ethan couldn't hold back another wave of tears. How had their paths diverged so completely, only to reconnect now through Sophie? Did she ever mention me? He asked hesitantly. Sophie shook her head. She never talked about anyone from college. At least, not that I remember. Her answer hurt, but it was understandable. Why would Julia talk about friends who had left her behind, who hadn't been there when she needed them? That night, after Sophie went to bed, Ethan rummaged through old boxes until he found what he'd been searching for, a college photo album. Among pictures of graduations and parties, there she was, Julia with her dark hair and vibrant eyes so much like Sophie's. In one photo, they stood together, smiling, her arm around his shoulders, their faces close, young and full of hope for the future. Realizing Sophie was Julia's daughter changed something that was already important to him into an almost sacred mission. It was no longer just about helping a child in need. It was about honoring the memory of someone who had once meant the world to him. It was about atoning, even if belatedly, for abandoning a friendship that should have endured. Ethan's determination to secure Sophie's custody intensified. He told his legal team to spare no effort or expense. Every bureaucratic hurdle would be met, every requirement fulfilled. It's not just a responsibility now, he told Claire the next day. It's a way to honor a friendship that never got closure. Life, with its unpredictable twists and mysterious connections, had found a way to bring Ethan and Julia back together. Not how he had imagined, but through the daughter she left behind. 2 months after learning about Julia, Ethan faced the most challenging part of it all, the American legal system. In his corporate world, obstacles were conquered with money, powerful connections, and efficient teams. But in the realm of adoption and child custody, he found that even all his wealth and influence couldn't guarantee quick results. I don't understand why it takes so long, he vented to Marina after yet another postponed hearing. I can offer Sophie everything, and in the meantime, she's stuck in this legal limbo. The attorney gave him a patient smile. Ethan, the system wasn't designed to be fast. It was designed to be thorough. We're talking about a child's life here, but we've already proven there are no living relatives, that she's safe with me, that we have a bond. What more do they want? Guarantees, certainties. This isn't a business contract you can terminate if you change your mind. It's a lifelong commitment. Her words weighed on him. Not that he had doubts. He was more certain each day that Sophie belonged in his life, but he understood the system's caution. Too many children had been hurt by rash decisions. Still, the bureaucracy felt disproportionately slow. At home, he tried shielding Sophie from the uncertainties. They kept their routine, school, dinner together, bedtime reading. But she was too perceptive not to notice the tense phone calls, the attorney visits, the rushed trips to the courthouse. One evening, while they cleaned up after dinner, she asked, "Is it really hard, adopting me?" Ethan paused, caught off guard by her directness. It's been challenging, he admitted. Because of me. No, Sophie. Never because of you. It's the system that's complicated, full of steps and checks. She nodded, absorbing his words as she carefully dried a plate. You know you don't have to do this, she finally said, her voice quiet but firm. You've already done a lot for me, more than anyone since my mom. Ethan felt his heart tighten. Even now, after everything, she was prepared for him to give up on her. Sophie, look at me, he said, crouching to her eye level. I'm not doing this because I have to. I'm doing it because I want you officially in my family, our family. And no amount of bureaucracy will stop me. Understand? Her eyes, so much like Julia's, brimmed with unshed tears. She nodded silently. The following week brought yet another obstacle. The judge requested an extensive psychological evaluation of Ethan, questioning whether a solitary corporate lifestyle was compatible with fatherhood. As if I'm some emotionless robot, he grumbled to Claire, who had become his confidant throughout the process. They're doing their job, she reasoned. And let's face it, Ethan. Before Sophie, your life was the office. You yourself said you didn't have time for relationships. It was true, and precisely the irony that bothered him. The system was judging his capacity to be a good father based on who he had been, not who he'd become with Sophie in his life. The psychological evaluation was followed by surprise home visits, interviews with Mrs. Martin, with Sophie's tutors, even with Claire and some of his employees. Every aspect of his life and his relationship with Sophie was scrutinized, dissected, filed into reports. One day, while picking Sophie up from school, he noticed someone discreetly watching him, the social worker assigned to their case. She didn't even try to hide when he confronted her. I'm just doing my job, Mr. Carter, she said calmly, and I must say, I'm impressed by your dedication. Many would have quit after all this bureaucratic red tape. I'm not trying to buy a car, he replied, more emotional than intended. I'm fighting for custody of a child I love. Giving up isn't an option. Something about his sincerity seemed to move the woman. In later reports, she highlighted Ethan's genuine connection and unwavering commitment to Sophie's well-being. At home, the dynamic had shifted again. Sophie, who once kept an emotional distance, was now fully engaged with the case. She asked about the hearings, wanted to know details about the judge's remarks, offered to help organize documents. Why the sudden interest? Ethan asked one evening, as she helped him sort through a stack of paperwork. Sophie hesitated a moment, carefully lining up the sheets of paper. Because now I believe it might actually work, she answered finally, not looking at him. At first, I thought you'd give up at the first sign of trouble. Most people do. The simplicity of her explanation revealed so much about her history, about the disappointments and abandonments she'd experienced in her young life. More importantly, it showed how her view of Ethan had changed. I'm never giving up on you, Sophie, he promised, feeling the weight of those words. Never. After 8 months of legal battles, hearings, appeals, evaluations, endless paperwork, the day of the final decision arrived. Ethan and Sophie waited in the courthouse hallway, both too nervous to speak. What if the judge says no? Sophie whispered, breaking the tense silence. Ethan considered her question for a moment. Then we appeal, and we keep appealing. As long as it takes. When they were finally called into the courtroom, Ethan felt as though he were about to close the biggest deal of his life, but infinitely more important. The judge, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, reviewed the documents one last time before giving his verdict. After a thorough examination of this case, and considering the extremely positive reports from the interdisciplinary team, I hereby grant permanent custody of the minor, Sophie Bennett Castro, to Mr. Ethan Carter. The formal, direct words took a second to register. When he understood what they meant, Ethan felt a tremendous weight lift from his shoulders. He looked at Sophie, whose face held a blend of shock and joy. Is it over? She whispered. Is it official? It's official, he confirmed, fighting back tears. "We're a family now, legally." After receiving congratulations from Marina and signing the final papers, they stepped out of the courthouse into the afternoon sun. In the car, before starting the engine, Ethan noticed Sophie rummaging in her backpack. "I have something for you," she said, handing him a small handmade card. Ethan's heart raced as he recognized the gesture, so reminiscent of the first card she had given him that night at the traffic light. With trembling hands, he opened it and read Sophie's careful handwriting. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for giving me a home." Lost for words, Ethan pulled her into a hug, realizing he had won not only a legal battle but something far bigger, the challenge of earning the complete trust of the extraordinary girl who was now Tay, officially his daughter. The drive back home after the final hearing was quiet, but not like the tense silences they'd once shared. It was a comfortable silence, full of thoughts and feelings too big for words. Ethan drove with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. Occasionally, he glanced at Sophie in the passenger seat, her fingers running over the edge of the official document she now held. Sophie Bennett Carter. "Do you think she would approve?" Sophie asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Ethan didn't need to ask who she meant. "Your mom, Julia?" Sophie nodded, her eyes on the cityscape passing by the window. "I'm certain she would," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "More than anything, your mom wanted you to be safe and happy, and I'm sure she'd be glad we stayed connected, even after all this time. Do you think it was a coincidence, me finding you at that traffic light?" The question made Ethan reflect. In his rational world of numbers and statistics, coincidences were just random events without special meaning. But this felt different. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "Maybe it's what some people call fate." Sophie seemed satisfied with that answer. They returned to their peaceful silence for the rest of the trip. When they finally arrived at the apartment, now officially their home, they were greeted by a small surprise. Claire, Mrs. Martin, and Sophie's tutors had prepared a simple celebration with balloons, a cake, and a banner reading "Welcome Home, Sophie Carter." "You all did this?" Ethan asked, genuinely surprised. "Claire's idea," Mrs. Martin explained, hugging a slightly embarrassed Sophie. "She said important moments deserve to be celebrated." Sophie looked around at the decorations and the people gathered for her, eyes bright with held-back tears. For a child who had lost so much, having people celebrate her arrival was overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. The small celebration was simple and warm. They ate cake, laughed, and shared stories from the past few months. At one point, Ethan watched Sophie animatedly discussing a book with Claire, and he felt a surge of gratitude so strong it nearly took his breath away. His life, once so fixated on material achievements and professional recognition, had been completely transformed by this little girl's presence. Values he'd never questioned had been re-examined. Priorities that seemed immovable had been rearranged, and, most surprising, he was happy about these changes. When everyone left and they were finally alone, Sophie was uncharacteristically quiet, as if processing everything that had happened. "You okay?" Ethan asked, helping her put away the last of the dishes. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" She hesitated, carefully folding a napkin. "About how everything changed. A few months ago, I was sleeping under an awning, not knowing if I'd have anything to eat the next day." She paused, glancing around the apartment. "Now I have my own room, new clothes, I go to school, and I have you." The simplicity with which she summarized the radical transformation of her life moved Ethan deeply. "You know," Sophie continued, more thoughtful now, "my mom always said life is full of surprises, that when one door closes, sometimes a window opens somewhere else, totally unexpected." "Your mom was a wise woman," Ethan replied, feeling a tug of nostalgia at the thought of Julia, the friend he lost without ever knowing how much she meant. "I'm going to take a shower," Sophie announced. "Then we can watch that movie you promised." "Sure, I'll make some popcorn." While Sophie showered, Ethan set up the living room for the movie night they'd planned as their private celebration of the custody's finalization. He arranged pillows on the couch, prepared popcorn, chose a film, an animated feature about a brave girl Sophie had mentioned wanting to see. When she returned, already in pajamas and with damp hair, she was holding something. "I have something for you," she said, handing him what looked like another handmade card, different from the one she'd given him at the courthouse. It was a simple card decorated with colorful drawings of two figures holding hands, one large, one small, beneath what appeared to be a starry sky. Ethan opened it, feeling a strange, anticipatory emotion. Inside, written in Sophie's careful handwriting, it read, "Thank you for giving me a chance. So now I know I have a home." The words were so simple yet so powerful, hitting Ethan with overwhelming force. He remembered the first card she'd given him at the traffic light, with its desperate plea for help. How that message had pierced his consciousness and broken through years of emotional numbness. And now, this new card closed a circle. From uncertainty to security, from homelessness to belonging, from loneliness to family. "Do you like it?" Sophie asked, suddenly unsure due to his silence. Ethan couldn't answer right away. He felt a lump in his throat, an emotion too intense for words. Instead, he opened his arms. Sophie didn't hesitate. She ran into his embrace, snuggling in as if it were the safest place in the world. In that moment, Ethan understood a truth he had never grasped in all his years of amassing wealth and business success. For the first time in his life, he felt truly rich. Rich not because of the millions in his bank accounts, nor his real estate holdings, nor the power he wielded in the corporate world, but because of the trust bestowed by that extraordinary child. Rich for the chance to make a real difference in someone's life. Rich for the privilege of loving and being loved unconditionally. That night, as they watched the movie together, Sophie fell asleep with her head resting on his shoulder. Ethan didn't wake her, preferring to watch her peaceful face, so reminiscent of her mother, who had once meant so much to him. Life, with its mysterious paths and unexpected connections, had granted him a second chance, a chance to build something more meaningful than corporate towers and investment portfolios, a chance to build a family. The next morning, he woke to the sound of Sophie in the kitchen, trying and apparently failing given the clamor, to make breakfast on her own. He smiled, feeling a simple, profound joy fill his heart. This was only the start of their new journey. There would be challenges, certainly. Sophie's teenage years lay ahead with all their complexities. The corporate world would continue to question his new priorities. There would be hard days, arguments, doubts. But now there was one absolute certainty, as clear as the morning light streaming into the apartment. He and Sophie would face it all together, as a family. A real family,